Okay, hello Cloud Gurus and welcome to this section of the course. In this lecture we're going to look at EC2, so this is EC2 101 and EC2 stands for Elastic Compute Cloud. And this is pretty much the most important topic for any of the associate exams. So whether you're doing Solutions Architect, whether you're doing Developer, or whether you're doing SysOps Administrator, if you don't know EC2, you're not going to pass your exam. So do pay particular attention throughout this section of the course. It is pretty much going to be the longest section of the course going forward. And make sure you read the FAQs before going into the exam. Read the EC2 FAQ. So what is EC2? Well, EC2 is a web service that provides resizable compute capacity in the cloud. Amazon EC2 reduces the time required to obtain and boost new server instances to minutes, allowing you to quickly scale capacity, both up and down, as your computing requirements change. So what actually is it? Well, it's virtual machines in the cloud. This is going to be your virtual Linux server or your virtual Windows server, and you provision them on demand. And we'll look at all the different types of EC2 instances in a few slides. So if you have worked in IT or in tech for a long time, you'll remember times before cloud computing. And it used to be that if I needed let's say I wanted a database server, what I'd have to do is I'd go to HP or I'd go to Dell and I'd look at the different rack-mounted servers or blade chassis servers available, and then I'd give them my specification. So I'd have to tell them how many processors I wanted, how many cores per processor, how much RAM I needed, what my disk size requirements are, whether I needed tier storage. So did I need SSD drives for an application that was going to be running, but then only magnetic for the operating system? And you basically had to build out this entire specification. So once you decided what server you wanted, you then had to decide on how long you were going to purchase this or rent this from HP or Dell. So you could have this on for a 12-month period or a 24-month period or up to 5 years, or you could purchase it outright. And then you would basically also choose how to finance it. Would you pay on a monthly basis, or would you purchase it outright and pay a high capex cost up front? And then once you've decided all this and actually got your purchasing department to sign off on it, and you raise a purchase order, and then you give this to the supplier, and then the supplier, accepts the purchase and starts to deliver the actual servers. It could take anywhere up to a month for the servers to arrive. And once they arrive, then of course your data operations center team have to basically rack the server. They have to patch in all the cabling, so they need to add in all the backbone networking as well as the internet connection. And then your sysadmins have to go in there and they have to make sure that the right operating system is installed, that it's installed to company security specifications, all the applications and monitoring tools are installed, and eventually this server would be handed over to you and you'd be able to use it. Now, depending on how quick your organization was, this could be anywhere from a couple of weeks all the way up to 6 or 12 months down the line. It used to be really, really frustrating. And then cloud computing came along, and suddenly with Amazon, you could instantly provision everything using a web portal. And for solutions architects like myself, it was a complete game changer. So no longer would I have to wait for 30 days, 60 days, up to a year for these servers to arrive. I could go in and start instantly provisioning this and start experimenting. And it really changed all of IT, because people like startups like Airbnb, Uber, they didn't have to have huge budgets to start experimenting. They could actually just go out and do this and only pay by the hour. And if something didn't work, you just tear it down. You weren't locked into any 12, 24-month or 36-month contracts. And it literally changed the world. The entire startup scene could suddenly afford to experiment at very low cost, and that's why you get all these innovative companies that exist today. They wouldn't have existed without cloud computing. So this is what EC2 essentially is, and this is why it's such an important exam topic, because it's one of the main cornerstones of cloud. So Amazon EC2 changes the economics of computing by allowing you to pay only for the capacity that you actually use. EC2 provides developers the tools to build failure-resilient applications and isolate themselves from common failure scenarios. We'll have a look at how we're going to do that in the labs coming up. So let's start with the different EC2 pricing options. So we've just been talking about on demand, and this is basically where you pay a fixed rate by the hour with no commitment. So this is what I'm talking about when I'm talking about startups. They could provision servers, pay for them by the hour. And then when they were finished with them, they could just terminate them and they wouldn't be locked into any sort of long-term contracts. We also have reserved, and this is where maybe you have a baseline capacity that you need to maintain. Maybe you always need 2 web servers in order to serve a minimum amount of your user base. So in that scenario, it makes more sense to reserve capacity over a significant period of time. We're normally talking 1 or 3 year terms. And because you are reserving that capacity and because you are basically guaranteeing to Amazon that you're going to be in a 1 or 3 year contract, you get a significant discount on the hourly charge for an instance. So we then have spot. Now think of spot pricing just like the stock market. Basically, a stock price goes up and down all the time depending on different market conditions, depending on supply and demand. So spot enables you to bid whatever price you want for instance capacity, providing you with even greater savings if your applications have flexible start and end times. So basically what you do is you put in a bid price, and if the bid price is higher than the spot price, and the spot price is the market rate at which you're paying for that particular instance, then you'll be able to provision that instance. But when the spot price goes higher than your bid price, that instance will then be terminated. And we'll talk about that in a couple more slides. So a lot of engineering companies, a lot of pharmaceutical companies, genomics companies will use this, and basically they'll be bidding for excess compute capacity that might be available at 2 a.m. on the Eastern Standard Seaboard, because nobody is visiting websites at that time, or very few people are. So a lot of compute capacity becomes available. It means that they can do their own compute during those sort of downtimes and pay a lot less for it than what they're paying for when they're using on demand. And then finally we have dedicated hosts, and these are physical EC2 servers that are actually dedicated for your use. Now, the real cool thing about this is you can pay for this by the hour. So again, you can have a dedicated physical machine for you, and you're only paying an hourly rate, and you're not locked into any long-term commitments. And this can be really, really useful when it comes to licensing. A lot of the legacy licenses for applications, or even not legacy, even some licenses today will say that it has to be on physical kit. It can't be on a virtual machine. So this is where dedicated hosts come in. So let's talk about on-demand. On-demand is where users that want the low cost and flexibility of EC2 without any upfront payment or long-term commitment. This is typical use cases where applications have short-term, spiky or unpredictable workloads that cannot be interrupted, or in our case, applications being developed or tested on Amazon EC2 for the first time. So we're going to be using on-demand instances for the rest of this course. The reason we're using on-demand is because we only want to pay for them when we're doing labs, and when we finish the labs, we want to then go in and terminate them because we don't need them anymore. Okay, so with reserved instances, you'd use this where you've got applications with steady state or predictable usage. So maybe you need a minimum of 2 web servers to serve your constantly online user base of 10,000 people. So what you would do is you'd go ahead and reserve capacity, be a 1 or 3 year period, and then you pay that up front and you get a significant discount. It's used for applications that require reserved capacity, and users are able to make upfront payments to reduce their total computing costs for an even further discount. Okay, so moving on to reserved instances. This is for applications with steady state or predictable usage. So I used the example before of maybe you always have 10,000 active users on your particular site, and you need a minimum of 2 very large web servers in order to accommodate that. So this is where you've got applications that require steady reserved capacity, and users are able to make upfront payments to reduce their total computing costs even further. So you're locked into a 1 or 3 year contract, and you can pay upfront, and you get the maximum discount if you pay for 3 years upfront, for example. So reserved capacity is great for if you know what your actual baseline is, and then you could supplement this with on demand, for example. So perhaps you always need 2 web servers, but during Black Friday sales, you want a minimum of 15 or 20. So you have your 2 reserved instances, and then you would use on-demand instances for your Black Friday sale. Moving on to spot. So spot, think of it like the stock market. There's always the spot price, the same with foreign currency markets. So the spot price is simply what the price is of that particular resource or stock today. So all EC2 instances will have different spot prices. The spot prices will change depending on the region and even depending on the availability zone. And then basically what you do is you set a bid price. So how much do I want to bid for that particular EC2 instance type in that particular particular region in that particular availability zone. And as soon as your spot price and bid price are the same, that's when you'll be triggered into purchasing it. And then if your spot price moves above your bid price, so in other words, if the price moves above what you're willing to pay for, then that EC2 instance will be terminated. So this is useful for applications that have flexible start and end times, and applications that are only feasible at very low compute prices. And I use the example of, there's a famous example if you go into the spot pricing section on Amazon's website and you go and read through the case studies. Pharmaceutical companies use this all the time to do really large scale high performance compute. They'll use spot prices, and what would normally cost them $1 or $2 million might only cost them $30,000 or $40,000 because it's done at a time when there's not a huge demand for compute capacity. Another use case is for users with urgent computing needs for large amounts of additional capacity. So let's say an unexpected world event has just happened, like Brexit, for example. Nobody really expected Brexit to actually happen. The pound devalued very, very quickly, and a lot of financial analysts suddenly needed to figure out, what this meant for their business, and they needed those answers really, really quickly in order to make decisions. So there's a perfect use case where you've got an urgent computing need and you need large amounts of additional capacity very, very quickly. You might use spot instances in that case. Moving on to dedicated hosts. So this is useful for regulatory requirements that may not support multi-tenant virtualization. There are still quite a few government bodies out there who don't particularly want you to put your infrastructure on public cloud. They're becoming less and less, especially when you consider that the US federal government uses GovCloud, which is an AWS service now. The UK government very likely will be moving to a similar model now that AWS has a region within the UK. By the way, I'm just speculating here. I don't know anything either way. But you'll find more and more governments are now moving onto public cloud because actually security is much more easier to achieve in public cloud than doing it on-prem yourself. It's also great for licensing, which doesn't support multi-tenancy or cloud deployments. This can be for Microsoft licensing, can be for SQL licensing, Oracle licensing, for example. So if you've got particular applications that need you on dedicated hardware, dedicated hosts is a great option for you. And the great thing about dedicated hosts is that you can pay on demand. So you can pay hourly and still have a physical computer that's dedicated to you. And if you purchase this as a reservation, so if you reserve it for 1 to 3 years, you can get up to 70% off the on-demand price. So quickly, I'm just going to give you a quick exam tip. This is on spot pricing, and this is really the main thing you're going to need to know going into the exam about the different pricing models apart from different use cases. If spot instances are terminated by Amazon, and this will happen when the spot price goes above your bid price, you will not be charged for that partial hour of usage. Okay, so let's say you bid at $1 and suddenly the spot price goes up to $1.50 and they're going to terminate that EC2 instance, and it only happens halfway, half an hour into when you first purchased it. You won't be charged at all for that hour. However, if you terminate the instance yourself because you're done using it, then you're going to be charged for any hour in which the instance ran. So it's really, really important to understand those 2 points because you are going to get scenario questions on there, and they'll give you an example. They'll give you a scenario where they're saying you've been running it for 1.5 hours. Are you going to be charged for 1 hour or 2 hours? And you have to decide based on the scenario that they give you. So remember the difference between the two. Okay, so now that you understand the different pricing models that are available to us, let's look at the different EC2 instance types. So there's a whole bunch of different families. There's 10 currently. There will always be more added all the time. Last year there was 7. And the different family depends on what it is you want to do with them. So D2, for example, is dense storage, and this is used for file servers, data warehousing, Hadoop, etc. So D is for density, 2 is just the generation. So there was D1s, these have been now replaced by D2s. Now you're not going to have to remember all of these going into the exams, but it really, really does help if you understand the different family types especially in the real world, but it also really helps in the SysOps Administrator Associate exam, and it really helps at both the professional levels and for the specialty cert. So I'd advise trying to learn these now, and I'll show you a trick to learning them in a second. So I'll quickly cover them off. We've got D for density, we've got R, I like to remember that as R for RAM. So these are memory optimized, and these are basically designed for memory intensive applications and databases. We then got M4. These are general purpose EC2 instances. So typically they're used for application servers. And if you're deploying an application server and you're not really sure what the application server is going to do, this is what you default to. So this is the main choice. That's the way I remember M4. C4 are compute optimized. So these are for CPU intensive applications and databases. Your G class are graphics intensive, so this is for video encoding or 3D application streaming. We then have I, which is for IOPS, and that's high-speed storage. So these are things like NoSQL databases, data warehousings, etc. We have F1. These are brand new out of reInvent 2016, and these are field programmable gate arrays, and this is basically where you can actually change the physical hardware underneath to suit the software that you're running on it. If you want to have some interesting reads, just Google FPGA to understand it in a lot more detail than I can explain. But just think of it as hardware acceleration for your code. So you can actually change the underlying hardware to suit your code, and they're brand new and very unlikely to feature in the exam, if I'm honest. We then have T2s. These are low-cost general purpose VMs, and we're going to be using T2s all the time in this course. It's going to be our default one, so we're always going to be using the T2 micro, which we will see in the very first lab coming up. And these are typically used for web servers and small database servers. We then have P2. P2 is for graphics and general purpose GPUs. Amazon say it's for machine learning and other use cases. They never say Bitcoin mining on their site, but trust me, if you're going to do Bitcoin mining, you probably want either a P2 or a G2. And then we have X1s. So this is memory optimized, and these are designed for things like SAP HANA or Apache Spark. So really extreme memory optimized. And that's the way I remember X1 is you need extreme RAM, you need extreme memory. So how are you going to remember these instant types going into the exam? Well, when there was 7 of them, and this was in 2016, I told all my students to remember this image. So this is the Melbourne cricket ground, and it's being dug up, and it's filled with dirt. So we remembered it using dirt MCG, so dirty MCG. Unfortunately, they've added in 3 new instance types, so it's ruined my dirt MCG. So these are the letters we've got to make an anagram out of. So we've still got dirt MCG, but now we've got FPX as well. So we've got 3 new instance types. And I put this into a Scrabble word generator, a couple of them actually, and I couldn't get anything halfway decent. So I actually came up with one myself, and forgive me, this is quite bad, but it makes me remember it. So what I came up with was Dr. McGiftpicks. So I want you to imagine a doctor. He's a Scottish doctor, which is the why his name is MC. But instead of being Dr. McDonald, who does burgers, Dr. McGiftpicks gives out pictures. So the way I think of a Scottish person, I grew up on DuckTales. So we saw the Scottish duck. He's clearly a doctor because he's got glasses on. And so Dr. McGiftpicks gives out pictures of his homeland in Scotland. So see if you can remember now what these individual letters actually stand for. Go ahead and pause the video. And once you're done, let's go ahead and have a look. So D is for density. R is for RAM. M is the main choice for general purpose apps. So this is where you want performance on your application tier. So if you don't know how what your application is going to be doing, and you just want a general purpose virtual machine, you're going to use M. C is for compute. G is for graphics. I is for IOPS. F is for FPGA, which is field programmable gate arrays. Again, very new. T is for general purpose compute, and we're going to be using T2 micros all the time throughout the rest of this course, so you're going to be very familiar with them. P is for graphics, so just think of pics, and then X is for extreme memory, so things like SAP HANA need a huge amount of memory, so X is for extreme memory. And there you go, we've got Dr. McGiftpicks. If you can come up with a better anagram, let me know, and I will re-record this lecture, but for now that's the way I'm going to remember it. Now don't freak out. Where you're going to see this in any of the exams, in any of the 8 exams, is they're going to give you a scenario and then they're going to ask you to choose the best instance type in which to work that scenario, and 3 of the instance types will be completely made up. There'll be an Y instance, for example, or a Q instance, and they just don't exist. So if you remember the acronym Dr. McGift picks, you'll remember all the valid types of EC2 instances, and then you'll be able to choose which ones are actually valid, and then hopefully you also remember what the families do, and then you'll be able to make a very informed choice. Okay, so we're going to end part 1 here. So the things you've learned so far is what EC2 is. We've learned about the 4 different pricing models. So we have on-demand, we have spot, we have reserved, and we have dedicated hosts. And then we've learned about the different instance types. And we've learned that there's 10 of them. And Dr. McGift picks is the acronym that we're going to use to remember this. So go have a coffee, go have a break, and see if you can remember all the different options for Dr. McGift picks. And then come back and we'll start on lecture 2. And we're going to cover off EBS volumes. So EBS volumes are just virtual disks that we attach to our EC2 instance. So if you've got the time, join me in the next lecture. Thank you.